I'm really excited to talk to you all about chunking and how we do it at Unstructured. I'm missing watching Severance right now for this. If any of you are familiar with the show, it's supposed to be a really good episode on right now. So I'm a staff developer relations engineer at Unstructured, and we're going to talk about what Unstructured is. We're going to talk about whether chunking is still relevant in the age of long context windows. And then we'll talk about our current approach that's available in our platform today, and then preview a brand new feature that we're just putting out now on contextual chunking and how we've implemented that. And then I'll show a quick demo of our platform with our chunking and contextual chunking. So Unstructured is a Series B startup. We have a number of customers across our open source and platform. If any of you are currently using Unstructured, I'd love to chat after and hear how your experience is going. And Unstructured kind of started by trying to solve this rat's nest problem of ETL. Our first version, our open source and V1 of our API was just addressing this challenge of having to use like 10 different file transformation packages, to have a robust pipeline. And also from then we've kind of expanded to other features, including chunking as well. And so Unstructured kind of lives between your systems of record and then a graph and vector database like KDB that can then feed into the observability and retrieval and interact with the LLM that may be powering your use case. And so we kind of have this conveyor belt of ETL where we extract the information. We have a partitioning step involving third-party APIs, chunking, enrichment, embedding, and then we load that to your vector database. I see some folks are taking a picture, so I'll go back to that one. But before we dive in on chunking, every once in a while, or I guess every week or so on Twitter, someone will say, RAG is dead. All you need is long context. And so every once in a while, we want to test that theory. There's a lot of hypothetical reasons why long context won't solve everything, but it's also good to get empirical results. And so on my team, we did a short study. There's a full blog linked here, and I think we're sharing the slides afterward. We looked at SEC S1 filings, and we compared the setup with RAG and also with long context with Gemini 2.0. And so we looked first at how much data was extracted for each field we were extracting from these S1 files, the TAM, the categories, shares offered, et cetera. And we have an asterisk indicating if we expect 100% of it to be extracted. And we actually found that our agentic RAG setup extracted more information than just Gemini, more consistently across these different fields, with the notable exception of categories, which is a field that kind of spans the document. So we kind of found also, well, of course, the price is lower for RAG than throwing a whole 50-page document to Gemini. And then the latency we found was slower for agentic RAG because we had tried this agentic setup to improve over baseline RAG. So we found that it is still useful to chunk your files and do RAG for something like information retrieval. There could be reasons not to chunk. For example, in the example I showed earlier of the categories, if you need information across the whole file, then you could try leveraging long context windows, or if you're setting up a knowledge graph and want element level information. So we'll have some interesting content around knowledge graph setup from Unstructured later on over the next month or so. So basically, before we chunk, what we're starting with is this partition step. We take your input, let's say it's a page of a PDF, and then we look at different elements within that file. So if there's text, a photo, a table, that will get sent to different models. And then each of those will combine into elements within the JSON that's output. So you don't have to throw a VLM at everything or LLM at everything. Some of these can be extracted more simply. And so we're also extracting a ton of metadata in addition to that JSON text that extracted the file name, the page number, the section, when it was modified, things like that. And so what we're putting together before the chunking is these elements, like the title elements, tables, images, things like that, in addition to the metadata. And so if you're familiar with the platform, we have a number of different settings that you can use for your chunking that I'll go into a bit more detail next. There's a soft limit and a hard limit. I'm sure if you're here for a talk on chunking, you're familiar with this hard limit for chunking, the max characters, that's the chunk size that is a popular discussion topic. We also have a soft limit that can help guide the chunk sizes. And then we also have settings for overlaps. And we also have different types of chunking strategies. And we always separate tables as standalone chunks. So here's an example of just a basic chunking strategy with some of the parameters that we allow structured users to tweak. So for example, if you have a number of elements, you have a soft limit and you have a hard limit. And so if a element is beyond the hard limit, it's going to get separated. Or if elements are shorter than that limit, they're going to get combined. So chunking can kind of go in two directions, splitting elements or combining them. And then the overlap feature will let you overlap from one section to the next. That kind of helps with preserving context between different elements in the text. And then, of course, we'll talk later about contextual chunking, which preserves context with the document overall. We do have one unique chunking offering that I haven't seen anyone else do, which is chunk by title. And so since we're detecting which parts of the file are titles, we can then create chunks that start with that title and then add other elements afterward. And that can kind of help preserve the cohesion of these chunks. So, it kind of depends on how your document is structured. You could end up with something on the left where you have chunks that start with titles and then other chunks that don't have titles. Or on the right, if you had title after title, you would have a shorter, you would have a title in each chunk. So, with our settings, there's a little bit more settings than you might typically have in a chunking setup. And so, for example, if you're combining text under a certain number of characters and that number is really high, you're not really going to ever hit your max characters. And you don't want to combine chunk by title with a really high combined text under n characters, because then you're going to have multiple titles within a chunk. So having a lot of different options means that you can kind of set it up incorrectly, inadvertently. So some suggestions that we make with our vanilla chunking offerings are to set a lower combined text under n characters and then a higher new after n characters, and then having your max characters be kind of the absolute maximum that you would want for a chunk, and where you'd see most of your chunks around the new after n characters setting, and then the max would kind of make sure they never get too long for your embedder, for example. So these are a few of the settings that we suggest. We'll share this slide deck after this presentation so then you can kind of see some of these suggestions. And there's a few different ways to experiment with chunking in unstructured. So for example, you could set up a workflow without chunking and embedding, put your results in blob storage, and then use that as input for your next round. And then you can just change your chunking and embedding settings as you'd like. Okay, so now that I've covered the basics of chunking with unstructured, I will share a preview of our contextual chunking. So it's kind of an overlay over everything I just shared. It can be used in conjunction with other strategies. It's just a little toggle in our platform that I'll demo in a bit. And it's based on the contextual chunking blog that Anthropic had put out recently. And so they have a prompt that inputs the whole document, and then it will add a prefix to your chunk that has that context from the full document. So for example, if your original chunk is the company's revenue grew by 3% over the previous quarter, this is not a great chunk. This is really not going to be that useful in ag. Your contextualized chunk would add this prefix. This chunk is from an SEC filing on Acme Corp's performance in Q2 2023. The previous quarter's revenue was $314 million. Now your chunk is going to be really informative. And so Anthropic found that this reduced the top 20 chunk retrieval failure rate by 35%. And then we took it out for a spin in our own platform as we were implementing it. And so we found that it also works great for longer chunks as well. You're just adding this prefix that tells you more about where the file is coming from. And we actually were able to improve upon Anthropic's prompt that they shared in their blog. We made a few small tweaks. And so in our comparison, it went from a 7% failure to retrieve with no context, about 4% with Anthropic's context, and we got it down to about 1% with our slight tweak on the prompt. And this is what we've deployed in our platform. And we have a blog on our results here and the approach we took. That's all I have for you all today. Here's some additional resources if you're interested in learning more. If you wanted to set up a proof of concept or enable contextual chunking, you can go to our enterprise page. If you just want to try it out, you can go to our developers page. We also put out several blogs a week, like some of the ones that I referenced. The one on contextual chunking is from this week. The Gemini versus RAG was from last week. And then we also have weekly webinars on Tuesdays. And actually, this will be a weekly webinar later in March.